Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media live event. I just want to say, if everybody can see me and hear me okay, please give me a thumbs up on your end or type into the chat function to let us know that all the tech is working on your side. Sometimes with these virtual live events, you never know what is going on. So, again, welcome everybody. Hopefully, everybody can see me and hear me okay. I was just behind the scenes looking at all the amazing comments that are coming in from folks dialing in from around the world. And that is the most amazing part about doing an event like this. And that's why I do these about every other week or so, because I think it's just a great way to engage with folks. So thank you all for saying, yes, everything is good. Sound quality is great. We are good to go. So, I want to say welcome. We are here today because we have a very special event talking about communication tips specifically for introverts. So, the fact that you're here, maybe you resonate as being an introvert, or maybe you're kind of somewhere in the middle, depending on the environment and who's there, or maybe you are a full and proud extrovert, but you maybe work with a lot of introverts on your team. By the way, let us know in the chat function, do you consider yourself an introvert, extrovert, or do you feel like you're somewhere here in the middle? Let me know in the chat function. This is what makes these events so fun, is when we can hear from you, we can get your comments coming in, because like I said, this is live. And as much as this is an event where we're going to be sharing our tips to help you boost your communication skills, I want you to know that this event is for you and it's supposed to be interactive, meaning if you have any questions, well, we are going to do our best to try to answer it because we want to keep it interactive. This was for you. So, if you're here today, I want to say I'm so glad. We are putting together a series of special Soulcast Media live events called the Book Launch Series. Now, if you've been following me for a while now, or you might be following some of my guests who I'm going to introduce in just a little bit, you might be familiar because I've just been nonstop talking about this book. I know it's kind of flipped, but this book, Smart Not Loud: How to Get Noticed at Work for All the Right Reasons, it comes out worldwide in about 3 weeks. So for me, it is crunch time, but it's also celebration time, because this book, once it gets out there, I'm just really thrilled for folks to read it. It's a communications book at the end of the day, but it's really written for folks who might not resonate with being that loud, dominant, assertive type. And I'll tell you, that's not me. That was never my style. And my background, for those of you who aren't familiar, I used to work on TV. So I was a former television journalist here in the US. And if you can imagine, in a newsroom on TV, you're surrounded by a lot of loud, dominant, extroverted people. And I was always known as like that quiet person. And it was hard for me to reconcile a little bit of like, how do I still get noticed at work for the right reasons? Because the truth is, visibility, getting noticed, having people see you and hear you and know about the work that you're doing is part of you getting bigger opportunities. That's just how the world works. And I think writing this book, it's to help those who might resonate with this. And I will say, a lot of the communication tips that I share, it does go beyond just being an introvert or an extrovert. A lot of it is thinking about how we might have been raised, right? Like, what were some of the things your parents, for example, taught you? Was it like, just be studious, just focus on the work, right? But again, work and doing and hitting your deadlines, that's 50% of it. The other 50% is communicating it. So that is what we're here today to basically celebrate this book launch. And I'm so glad you're here. But above all, we're here to share communication tips, especially for those who might resonate as being an introvert. So I love how many of you are saying, most of you are like, ambivert, introvert, depends. And I love how, Donald here is giving us 60% introvert and 40% extrovert. And that's the thing that I found. I think sometimes, depending on our environment, who is around, maybe what we're talking about, we can skew one way or the other. So let's just get into today's event. So I'm going to do a quick intro. My name is Jessica Chen. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Soulcast Media, and we focus on communications training. So we work with a lot of the Fortune 100 companies. We come in, we do trainings. I do a lot of speaking, but again, as you can imagine, the book is what we're focusing on for the next few weeks because it's coming out. So today, I'm really thrilled because unlike my other typical live events, I usually invite just one guest, but today I have two special guests that I'm really thrilled. You might have seen them because they're also very active here on LinkedIn, and it's Lorraine and Diana. And I'll tell you a funny story. All of us connected because, well, first of all, I can't say we're all Asian American because Diana is Asian Canadian, but we're all Asian women working in, the Western working world. That's how we started our career. And now we are LinkedIn learning instructors. And I think all of us, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves shortly. I think all of us are very passionate about helping folks elevate their career and accelerating. So, with that, I'm thrilled to bring them up. So, let me try to turn on their cameras. Hello, Lorraine. Hello, Diana. Welcome.
Hello. Hello, hello. Thank you for having us.
Oh my gosh. I'm so thrilled. All of us are here. So let's just do a quick intro for those who might not be familiar. So, Lorraine, why don't you go first? We would love to hear a little bit more about you, the work that you do.
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Lorraine. I am an introvert. And I spent the first 10 years of my career leading editorial teams at tech companies. So I was a founding editor at LinkedIn. That's where I met Jess. I was a founding editor at Prezi. That's where I met Diana. And now I am a solopreneur, so I'm a keynote speaker and trainer, and then I'm also an instructor with LinkedIn Learning and Stanford Continuing Studies. And the through line topic that I'm really passionate about speaking about is how to supercharge your professional presence. And when I say presence, I mean it in both senses of the word. So how others see you, certainly, but also where others see you, especially now that we're virtual, hybrid, that's especially critical. So I think that topic fits very well into the session today, and I'm excited to chat with all of you.
Professional presence. That is definitely something that is, I can already think of all the communication tips
Yeah,
that have to go with professional presence. So, we're going to
absolutely.
be talking about all of that. So, Diana, love to do an intro or have you do an intro of yourself for those who might not be familiar with you and your work.
Amazing, amazing. Well, first of all, I am so delighted and honored to be here with you, Jessica and Lorraine. It's such an honor, and I want to congratulate you, Jess, for launching your book. I've been following, and you've been a huge inspiration of mine being a speaker. So I want to let you know that I'm so proud of you here. So I'm Diana K. Chan, founder of My Markability. I'm a speaker and coach, where the past decade I specialize in executive career coaching, and currently also specialize in business coaching for coaches. My domain expertise is in personal branding and networking, where I'm really known for helping people to differentiate their personal brand, master their messages, and communicate with confidence. And a big part of the work I do that ties into communication here is how do you advocate for yourself by owning your voice, value, and visibility?
I love it. And Diana, I think you and I have been connected for quite a while too. And here's a funny story. Before all of us jumped on this live, all three of us were behind the scenes and we were chatting. We were like, we've all been connected. We've all been friends for a while, but this is the first time all of us are together doing this special event. I'm so grateful to Diana and Lorraine for basically celebrating this special time with me. So let's get started. We're talking about communication tips for introverts. And, Lorraine, you've admitted it. You're an introvert. I am an introvert. Diana, you're kind of like, it depends on the setting. And we'll talk about all of it. And I'll just kind of start off and kick off the conversation about, communication tips for introverts. And I'll start with talking about how what I've learned, and I'm going to definitely be talking about things inside the book too, because it's called Smart, Not Loud. I think when it comes to introversion, right, we see it as like people who might tend to be on the quieter side in meetings, but it doesn't mean that introverts cannot be powerful communicators. I just think it's the way we process information. It's the way we gain and regain our energy, recharge. And I don't know about you, Diana and Lorraine, but I know after a huge social event, big team meetings, I love to just go back to my room, my office, and whatever, and just close a door and just like decompress. And then I can go back out. Like to me, that is how I get my energy. And that's how I can go back out and give 100%. So I'll tell you, like, even after this live, we're going to go off and I'm going to be like, whew. But, anyways, Lorraine, when it comes to communication tips, like for you, like what are some things that come to mind? And I'm sure folks might ask you this question too. Like, what are some things they can do to build their speaking confidence?
Yeah, so I think everything you just said is completely accurate in terms of the energy management piece of it. And to your point, introverts can be social and they do have great things to say. It's just about finding the right moment and then also managing your energy. So I think for me as an introvert, where I've really leaned into are sort of two key things that come up for me. The first is that introverts are often really amazing writers. So communication doesn't just have to be, oh, me speaking up in a meeting, but it can be me writing something insightful in the chat or asking an interesting question there. And so to really understand those superpowers you have, again, it doesn't have to be the loud voice in the room, but understanding that you are a strong thinker, you are a strong writer, and to really find opportunities to let that writing shine. The second thing I would say is I think introverts really thrive in those one on one settings. And so to be able to develop those relationships, if you are looking for buy in for an idea, for example, I think going into a large meeting and just facing everyone for the first time is extremely stressful and would be very nerve wracking. But one thing that I was taught is, meet with everyone individually one on one before, develop those relationships, share, maybe give them a heads up what you're going to be talking about in the meeting. And I think that can be very comforting as an introvert and also really lean into your superpower, do those one-on-one conversations, build those relationships, and then the meeting with the big group will be a lot more successful.
I totally agree. I think back to, some of the meetings that we have where there's a lot of people,
Yeah,
and I look at my extroverted colleagues and they have no problems being the first one to chime in within seconds, right? And
yeah,
I would always be like, wow, how are they so how did that come so easy for them versus for me, I feel like I have to look around the room. I have
yeah,
to and I feel like I'm just so hyper aware of like other people
yeah,
and like once I muster up the courage to like say what I want to say, sometimes it's like the conversation has moved on. But I
yeah,
have found to your
yeah,
point, Lorraine, absolutely. I think, when you can foster the one-on-one relationships with people and then they're in that meeting with you, it then becomes so much more comfortable for you to share your thoughts with them. So Diana, I mean, I don't wanna, like, say whether you are an introvert or an extrovert. Why don't you share with folks, like, how do you resonate? And then what are some communication tips that you'd love to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an extrovert and I'm an ENFJ from Myers-Briggs. I would say that I'm a high extrovert when I'm in like speaking in front of hundreds of people, high in energy, passionate. That's really me. However, when I'm in group settings, especially social settings that are like groups of like even like 10 or more, I tend to be more an introvert and I tend to be more a listener. And I think this is also going to do with my upbringing where I was grown up to told to be, to be humble, to listen. So I tend to listen a lot. And I think this is why I love coaching. I love one-on-one coaching, asking powerful questions to listen, where I tap into that. But I also love being in front of people. I love human connection. I can talk for hours. However, after a social event or after like a major talk or performance, I need my downtime. Like I love being alone as well. I love being on my own after a talk. So I love the question here from Lisa. Like, can you be an introvert turning into an extrovert? That's really interesting question here because my husband's a high introvert, and I feel over the years he has become more extroverted because of me, of that I enjoy talking to people. So I've seen him being more extroverted in certain situations there. So I believe you can adapt to different styles there. But I think when in terms of communication styles, so for me, because English is not my first language and I grew up back and forth, Hong Kong, Canada, my philosophy in communication is always clear, concise, and compelling. Keep things simple. And this is what has guided me to become an interview coach and helping people get really clear on what is their overall narrative, communicating like 3 points of what they have to say. getting straight to the point. So those are my common communication tips there. I like to also use simple language. Like for me, because English is not my first language, I don't like to use too fancy words.
And I think when it comes to being an effective communicator, honestly, and when you think about presentation, for example, the simpler you can keep it, including your vocabulary, the better. So, it's funny because we also work with a lot of folks at Soulcast Media internationally. So, for example, let's say in Asia, where English is not their first language. And sometimes they feel like, oh, but if I can't say that complicated word, does it make me sound, less sophisticated? But I'm actually like, at the end of the day, it's not about sounding sophisticated. What you're trying to do is get people to understand you and build relatability. I think those two things are the most important. Having people understand you and build relatability. And I will almost guarantee that it has nothing to do with how sophisticated your vocabulary is, or even if you have an accent. So there are some really amazing questions that are coming in that I actually want to get into, because this is why we're doing this. This is a live event, and your questions coming in allows us to talk about it. And there's an interesting question that says, is being an introvert looked at as a disadvantage in a competitive world? So I'll take this question first because I actually write about this in the book. So, by the way, the book is divided into a part one, a part two, and a part three. And I'll give everyone a high level overview of it. But part one is about teaching folks to reframe how they think about the way they show up in the workplace. So in part one, I talk about how, and a lot of it is very personal. I talk about how, for me, I was raised in a very conservative environment. So it was a very traditional Asian household where we were not taught things like speaking up. We were not taught things like raise your hand. We were not taught things like, share your thoughts, share your wins, or even advocating for yourself. And I think when I say those things, a lot of it can seem very introverted in some ways, right? You're not speaking up, you're not putting yourself out there. But in part one, I talk about how those are valuable, actually. Those are still valuable traits and behaviors: to listen more than speak, right? To be more humble, to be more modest. But the truth is, and I want to get your thoughts, Diana and Lorraine, is in many corporate Western influenced workplaces, there tends to be what we call an extrovert ideal, right? It's where we pay attention to the loudest person in the room, where our eyes and our ears are like, oh, whatever that person says. There's a thing where we call it's called like the babble hypothesis. I don't know if both of you have heard that, but it's basically, it's always a person who speaks more, not so much about the quality, that tends to be seen as having more leadership abilities. It's so bizarre. It's called the babble hypothesis. And, for me, I saw this in my work early on as a journalist, and it was hard. So in part one of Smart Not Loud, I talk about how we can reframe the way we approach work, knowing that in many ways, this is the environment we're in. This is the context we're operating in. And then in part two, I talk about building your quiet capital framework. And I love that word, quiet capital, because I think quiet is powerful. I think quiet is a strength. So in the book, I'm not talking about, and this is maybe for my introverted folks, it's not about eliminating the quiet side to you. It's using it as capital. And so I talk about it as building your career brand, building credibility, and then teaching you how to advocate for yourself. That's part two. And then part three is all things communications. Because at the end of the day, all this can be theory, but you got to be able to express yourself and your idea. So that's a high level overview. If it's a very, I call it, it's like a very like complete book, because I think it really takes people on a journey. So, to answer your question, is being an introvert looked at as a disadvantage? Like I said, in many corporate Western influenced workplaces, there is that ideal, but it doesn't mean we cannot leverage what comes natural to us to get people to notice. So I'm going to pull you back in, Diana, but what are your thoughts on, if people know that this is what's rewarded, right? Being loud, but that's not their style. How would you encourage them to put themselves out there in a way that feels right.
Yeah, this is such a great discussion because you got me thinking back when I was in business school, and 50% of our grades was on participation, speaking up. And I had the softest voice in class, and I was told that if I didn't speak up, I would fail. And going back to it being top of mind or being heard, being seen to have essentially either the advantage or to get the grades here, I think that the way I look at it, because I do a lot of branding work, is we need to first also embrace our true self, our authenticity of who we truly are, right? Being comfortable in our own skin and really believing in our own self-worth and value, that we have something valuable to say. I feel like that's the first step, because if you believe that you have something valuable to say, then you would start communicating your thoughts and your ideas, right? I think that's the first step, is even believing that you are enough and that you have something valuable to offer. I think that's the first step, because a lot of times I feel like what I've been hearing from a lot of people I hear is that, well, I want to share this, but I don't know if my English is good enough, or if what I'm saying makes sense, or how the people get perceived. And so the first step is even just believing yourself and being bold enough to speak up. And I've noticed myself in the last couple years, or even 5 years or so, as I started to embrace my authentic self of who I truly am. Right? There's that extrovert side of me, the introvert side of me, and how I have this also vibrant personality and positivity versus trying to be conservative and all that, that I'm able to really connect with people better and
I
really
love
believing in what I have to offer is valuable. And so I think that's the first step, is that.
I love that. It's that self-confidence and that knowing your worth, right? I actually had somebody the other day who was like telling me that they struggled with the confidence part at work. And I had to remind them that your company hired you for a reason. And whether you've been at that company for just a few months or even a few years, and maybe let's say you made a mistake on a project and that definitely shot your confidence, know at the end of the day, you bring something valuable. And like you said, Diana, it is really that belief in yourself, whether you're introvert or extrovert, that can really propel your message to be so much more powerful. I love that.
Absolutely. I just want to bust a myth as well, because one of the common questions I always get whenever I do a talk on personal branding, I always get a question asking, is personal branding only for extroverts?
Mhm.
That's the question I always get, because of advocating for yourself, promoting yourself, selling yourself. It feels like it's more an extrovert type of activity. And in fact, you don't need to be an extrovert to have a great brand. I think this is where you talk about quiet capital actually ties into this piece of personal branding, is part of knowing yourself, knowing your worth, and speaking up when needed. You don't have to be speaking all the time, but finding the right moment to speak where you're heard. I'll give one story. This will resonate. This was many years ago, 10 years ago. Like I just shared with you, that my husband is a high introvert, high introvert, analytical. And we did a training together. It's called the Enlightened Warrior Training Camp. So imagine like hundreds of people, where it's like high energy, raw, right? And we're faced with this obstacle course of how to do this crazy obstacle course here. All these extroverts were all like sharing ideas of what to do, and like we couldn't figure out a solution. And when my husband spoke, everyone just listened, and we went with that idea. And so I think this is such a powerful example as introverts, is that you don't have to be the loudest or have the most ideas to get your point across. But if you have a great idea that everyone can understand how to execute it, that could be the way to go there.
He basically dismantled the Babel hypothesis that I was just talking about, where it's like people just talk, 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 and nobody's really listened. But when the quiet person talks, people pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I'm a little sick, but okay, Lorraine, I want to get your thoughts on this. We're talking about people who work in an extrovert ideal world. How can somebody overcome that and still get noticed?
Yeah, well, I think what you said earlier, Jess, about mindset is super key, and just getting in the right mindset, knowing, I mean, similar to what Diana said, right? Knowing that you have value, knowing that you are there for a reason. So just the mindset shift, understanding that you do have value, I think is the first step. The second thing I would say is, earlier I talked about how I speak to companies about professional presence. And the second piece of presence is, where are you showing up? So I think a lot of people, when they think of, oh, I have to be loud, I have to contribute, it's directly in the meeting. But there's so many different channels now where we can exude presence, where we can make our opinions, our insights known. So whether it is through an email, whether you are very active in a Slack channel, right? Like all those different touch points that we have in a given day. Think about just how many different ways you communicate, right? And all the different places you communicate. And those are certainly just as valuable, if not more valuable sometimes, right? Like so many companies, we're not seeing each other in person. Maybe we're doing more asynchronous communication. So leaning into those other channels as well to make your voice known. Again, not necessarily through spoken word, but written word, I think is another great strategy. And then the third thing I would say, there is this really interesting data that came out, I think a few months ago, around executive presence. So I talk about executive presence and branding a lot as well when I speak to companies. And I was so excited when I came across this data. And basically, what it showed is that our definition of what executive presence is has really changed over the past 10 years. So I think it was from 2012 to 2022, and it listed all these adjectives of, how people describe executive presence across three main buckets. So gravitas, communication, and appearance. And so the sort of like the first place adjectives were all the same across 2012, 2022. But then you start seeing some shifts, right? So things like authenticity appeared on the list, both for communication and appearance from 2022. That was not on the list before, right? So that's good news for all of us introverts, right? To really lean into our authentic selves. Things like forcefulness were pushed off the list, which was really nice. Nice to see, right? For us, less forceful personalities. Listening to learn, like all of these sort of people-centric qualities were appearing in 2022, and I assume are still continuing today. And so that should hopefully be very invigorating and exciting for the introverts, especially in the audience who really embody these skills. And it's great to see, through COVID, I think a lot of that authenticity, just being our true selves, has really come to the forefront. So I think we're uniquely positioned to really thrive in that sort of environment.
I love that. I love that you shared that. And it actually reminds me of, somebody asked me, or they actually shared this very personal conversation that they had with their manager. And they were actually really frustrated because their manager basically told this person, I need you to be more assertive at work. Like that was actually a performance feedback that they got. And I remember when this person said this, and by the way, I don't know if this resonates with any of you. Maybe you've had a manager or somebody on your team who said that to you too. You got to be more assertive at work. So it came from a very well-intentioned place where they knew, they know who you are, they know about the quality of your work, but they're just like telling you, you got to speak up more in meetings. And I will tell you, as an introvert, if somebody was like, you got to speak up more in meetings, I'm like, of course, I know this. Like, I know that I need to do this, but obviously it's not easy for me to do. So, this person was actually asking me, how do I deal with that? Like, how do I become more assertive in the workplace? And Lorraine, what I love about what you said is there are many different communication platforms other than the speaking. It's like, utilizing the written communications, or if it's like, if your company uses Slack, the instant messaging, like those types of things, being more assertive and sharing your thoughts there are a great way to showcase yourself. And this is actually where I have to share a tip that's in my book because there's a section, it's actually in part 3, and it's in chapter like 7, where it's all about the words that you say. It was about how can you chime in? I don't even use the word speaking up. How can you chime in during meetings? Because it's important to do. And I think this is going to resonate for a lot of my introverted folks who tend to kind of like to sit back and like observe first. So when you have to chime in during meetings, a lot of it is actually about timing. And it's finding that right timing to insert yourself into the conversation. And so there is like a sequence, and I'm going to go through the sequence with you all. And this is in the book, and I'm just going to share it with you because I think it's very important and useful given the conversation we're having. So the first one is like, it's A for active listening. You got to actively listen with the intention to chime in. The opposite of active listening is passive listening, which is where you're just in a meeting just to listen, but you have not really a high intention of chiming in. And I think for introverted folks, this is a very intentional switch, because I think sometimes we'll go into meetings and we'll just be like, I'm here to learn, I'm here to listen, right? I think that's a lot of our default. But knowing that you are going to say something, right? Knowing you're going to say something is where you can start actively listening. And then from there, you find that perfect moment. It could be a pause. It can be what someone just said that you're like, this is where I can contribute. And then what you do is you acknowledge. So that's actually the second A. So it's like a sequence of A's. You acknowledge. And this is so strategic. And I want to get your feedback, both Lorraine and Diana, on this. But you acknowledge by saying, Diana, that was a really interesting point you just said. Lorraine, that idea made me think of, right? So you're essentially saying a person's name. That's one way to acknowledge, but letting them know that you heard them. And it's a very seamless way of inserting yourself. And then from there, there's like the third A, which is anchor. So anchor is where you choose one or two words that person just said. Diana, you said personal branding, and it made me think of, or Lorraine, you said executive presence. So that I'm anchoring what you just said, those words, into now what I want to say, which is next, answer. Now I give my answer of the point I'm trying to make. This is what I call the 4A sequence, and it's a very strategic and intentional way. And this is like, one of the tactical tips that I love teaching folks of like, this is what you want to do if chiming in during meetings feels hard. So, active listening, acknowledging, anchoring, and then answering. So, Lorraine, I want to get your thoughts. What does that resonate with you as like a very strong introvert? If
Oh my
somebody
gosh.
gave you that tip, would that help you?
Yeah, oh my gosh, definitely. And I think the thing that I really like about that and just generally like when when we are faced with difficult sort of situations or situations that might be a little bit stressful, having a framework to follow, I mean, having that structure, I mean, introverts are very thoughtful, right? And pay attention to detail. So I think that, I mean, the framework, yeah, goes a long way in helping you not just be like, oh my gosh, I have to just come up with something, but okay, step one, step two, step three,
Mhm.
step four. So yeah, it really resonates. And something that I was thinking about as you were speaking is, the meeting facilitator also has a responsibility as well to make sure that people do have those opportunities. So, one thing I talk about is rules of engagement. So, ahead of any meeting, if you are a meeting facilitator in the audience right now, whether you're an introvert or extrovert, make it really clear how people can chime in. I think as an introvert, the idea of figuring out the right moment to unmute and to hop in, I mean, it is so stressful. I'm just like, and then by the time you get, brave enough to unmute, like the conversation has already moved on. So really making it clear, okay, everyone who wants to participate, please like raise your virtual hand, or I will pause at this moment for questions, or send me a chat if you like have something that you need to say. I think goes a long way. And then one other thing that came to mind was finding your extroverted buddy in the meeting can be really helpful too. So, like, if us three were in a meeting, I'd be like, Diana, like, I think I'm going to have something to say about this topic. Like, can you help me jump in when that moment comes up? So, yeah, great
Yeah.
acronym for sure. And then those other thoughts came to mind as well for just how we can make it more inclusive.
I love
Yeah.
what you mentioned. I was like, Lorraine, like the dreaded mute and unmute. It's
So
like,
hard. Yeah,
it's like a battle sometimes.
yeah,
Diana,
Well,
your
I'm
thoughts?
going to build on this is that as an extrovert, something I pay attention to is knowing, for example, Lorraine is an introvert here. I would ask her, I'm like, Lorraine, it sounds like you have something to say, or what are your thoughts here, Lorraine? So as an extrovert, like, paying attention to include other people.
yeah,
If you feel like they have been quiet, but they've been waiting for their turn, is to ask them that question, like, hey, looks like you're thinking about something. You have a point to say. Would you like to say something there? Right. So just to build on that, I love the framework that you taught, Jess, because I'm big on frameworks, especially with acronyms. It's like my style. And when you talked about active listening, one of the power of active listening is about being present. And when you're present, people can feel connected to you and your energy. They can feel that. It's through the body language, right? Your tone of voice, your presence, they can just feel that. And so even though you may not be speaking, but if you're head nodding and you're smiling and your posture is showing engagement, people can feel that. you are actually either supporting them in their idea of what they have to say, right? If you're in agreement, or even if you just have like a little, like say, raising your hand a bit and they see you that you want to ask a question, you are signaling to them as well. Like as a speaker, I see when people are there are present, like whether it's through head nodding, even though they're not speaking. So keep that in mind in terms of body language. And Lorraine, when you talked about the authenticity piece, that data, I really love that. I want to back this up with this other data around embracing your authenticity. It has shown that when you are step into your most authentic self, you are 4,000 times more charged in your authenticity frequency that you emit. That is more powerful than gratitude and love. Meaning that when you step into your most authentic self, people are magnetized to you. They're more attracted to you as well. And so this is really goes back to the importance of, do you feel like you get to be yourself when you are showing up at work? Or do you feel like you don't belong? Right.
I was gonna say, that it goes back to what we were saying about this belief in yourself and knowing what you have to say matters. And sometimes that can take you 50% there, that energy that you need. So there's actually some really interesting, comments that I think pertains to this aspect of chiming in. And one of the persons like was saying, it's like, well, by the time I want to chime in or I have an idea, the conversation has moved on. And let me actually share one of my tips and advice for if this is the case, because this is a very real life scenario. And actually, as I was thinking about this answer, Diana, you actually were doing it. So what you actually did, and this is the tip, is if the conversation has moved on and you're like, I actually do have something to say about that topic, you can actually say the words, going back to what we were talking about really quickly and just saying that. Like, by the way, I want to bring us back to what Diana or what Lorraine just said, right? And so even though the topic has slightly moved on, you can still retract and go back and say like, "Hey, I actually want to add my 2 cents." Add your 2 cents and then you can kind of move on with the conversation. So don't feel if you have something that you really want to share and you're like, "Oh, is it too late?" It's not too late. It's probably something that people need to hear. And the way you can do it is you actually just say that. Like, actually, I want to build off what Lorraine or build off what Diana just said really quickly and just even say that and then you get into your point. So, that's a tip and it's almost like don't feel bad doing so. It's actually, what you have to say really does matter. Um
Yeah. I'm curious. I have a question. I want to ask the audience about this as we're talking about introvert extrovert here. Is how many of you feel like if those who are introverts, like find it either awkward or not how to carry the conversation when you're in an interview setting? I know it's a little different than meetings because the stakes are higher. Like I'm just curious to hear like what are the challenges that people face like as an introvert going to an interview. Do you feel like you're waiting for the person to ask the question, like how to carry that conversation? I guess the question is, how do we carry the conversation in that setting when you're being interviewed?
I have a few tips that I would like to share, but I want to give Lorraine a chance to like come up and get your answers on that question. Like in an interview setting, if you're introverted, how do you put yourself out there in a way that feels comfortable?
Sure. Yeah. I think, the tip I'm going to share, I think applies to interviews or just like everyday conversations with coworkers. But I think what happens on a lot of calls or meetings, especially virtually, is a lot of us are on autopilot. And so we are doing just the usual small talk, like, how are you? I'm good. How are you? And that doesn't really advance the conversation, especially if you're in an interview setting, right? You want to try to get to know the other person a little bit more. So even in shifting your response a little bit, let's say the interviewer asks you like how you are. Oh, I'm so great because of, XYZ reason. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today. Already you've amped up the energy and shown that positivity and brought that to the call. Beyond that, though, I really encourage people to turn off autopilot and turn small talk into more strategic conversation. So moving away from the how are yous, can you see my screen? How's the weather? But instead, going, small tweaks beyond that. So instead, how are you? Like, what are you excited to be working on? How's the weather? You might respond and then say, oh, I've always wanted to, travel there, or I have a trip coming up there. How was your weekend? What was the highlight of your weekend? So it's digging in a little bit further, pushing people to sort of pause and actually think about what their response is versus just, that autopilot conversation. So I would say, in terms of interviewing, I think sort of that building that connection and that rapport early on is really critical.
Connection, rapport is definitely something that's so important in interviews. And I will say, and this is kind of what I wanted to add, when it comes to interviewing as an introvert, I think mindset is incredibly important. And when I say mindset, let me be specific. I want you to know two things. You can actually control the direction of the interview based on what you decide to share. And not only that, interviews are the opportunity for you to talk about your wins. That is why we do interviews. It's an opportunity for you to advocate for yourself, celebrate the achievements that you've done at your previous company to make you even more attractive. And I know right now that might be like, whoa, this is like, how do I do that? That's so uncomfortable as an introvert, especially if you tend to be on the more modest and humble side, which is what I talk about in the book, right? Because this book really was written for those, like I said, who tend to be more modest, humble, introverted, who are not comfortable talking about their wins. But in the context of an interview specifically, because Diana, you brought this up, I think it's knowing the interview is actually something that you can control. It's not just the interviewer asking you the questions. You can actually, I call it planting the seed of sharing something interesting. And then they'll be like, oh, tell me a little bit more about that. It was never in their series of questions, but because you said it, you shared it, now they want to know more. Diana,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, what both of you are saying here is be interesting and be interested. Right. So tell something about you that makes it interesting for them to learn more about you and also be interested in the other person, which ultimately will then build the rapport, the connection, and the trust. Right. One of the things I like to do is to talk about priming yourself, right? Priming yourself to get excited. Like it's okay to have the nerves, whether you're introvert, extrovert, but prime yourself to get into the right headspace, right? Like minimize distractions so that you will feel grounded and centered to help you feel confident moving into the meeting, that you're focused, doing some of those breathing exercises. I like to even do things like visualizations, affirmations, saying things like, I am excited to meet this person. I'm excited to share more about what I bring to the table. And one of the reframes I teach a lot because most people are uncomfortable promoting themselves or selling themselves. So instead of thinking that you need to sell yourself, think of how you're actually being of service. What are the benefits of hiring you? Right. So when you think of it from that other perspective of how you're helping someone, helping an organization, it actually becomes easier to talk about yourself. Right? It's a reframe.
The reframing is so important. It actually made me think about how, for some introverts, and I'm talking about myself, I feel sometimes the pressure of, I have to say the right thing. I have to know it has to be perfect in order for me to say. I don't know if anybody resonates with that. And might be for those who are very high achieving, who are like perfectionist type, who's like, I don't want to say anything unless I know for sure. And I found, and I also mentioned this in the book, where when it comes to communications and getting noticed at work, it is not about having all the answers. You don't need all the answers. Most people don't even have all the answers. But if that makes you uncomfortable, what you can also do in your communications is you can actually preface it. You can actually say words like, I'm thinking out loud here. Just saying that is almost like hedging. It's what we call hedging. It's a buffer, right? So you're letting others know that what you're saying, you're still processing in real time. But the reason why this is so powerful is you're still talking, you're still communicating, and you're still getting noticed. Lorraine, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. As you were saying that, it made me think of something else too, in that, letting people so I think that what you said, Jess, makes a lot of sense. And I think like one other thing introverts can do is letting people know that you're introverted. I think that's something that you might not necessarily think of like, oh, I have to talk about my personality type. But when you do that, I think it also and help people understand like yeah like you are going to be someone like who prefers to have a little bit more time to think and come up with your thoughts, but if you are jumping in live from a meeting, like you just process things different ways. And so yeah, that came to mind when you were saying that. I think that can shed a lot of light to your coworkers about how you think, how you work, yeah, and just how you come up with what you want to share. So that immediately came to mind. I don't know if either one of you has ever like shared your personality type at work before, but would be curious to hear.
I actually have never explicitly personally said like I'm a introvert unless it like comes up. In fact, a lot of people are very surprised to hear. So my Myers-Briggs is actually an INFJ. So actually, it's not too far from yours, Diana. I think our E and the I's are flipped. But and that's kind of like what I want to share with folks. Like because I teach communications, people are like, "How you're seriously an introvert?" And I'm like, "I am seriously an introvert." And I think the energy that propels me to do things like this, right? Speak live, do live events, speak to big audiences. A lot of me being able to do that is the preparation work behind the scenes to give the energy to do that because I know when we're on, we're on. We're doing this thing, right? And I think that's the same approach when we go into meetings, right? It's like, okay, we're in a meeting and hopefully we're not like in too many back-to-back meetings, but if we know we have an important 2 o'clock meeting, then it's kind of like telling yourself, okay, this is an important meeting. I got to bring my A game, right? And then once the meeting's done, then you can kind of sit back, relax, and then like re-energize again. But I think it's kind of knowing when you need to bring that energy because that moment of when you're in a meeting with people, people are seeing you, that's when impressions are formed. So, Diana, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, studies show that it takes 7 seconds for one to form an impression about you. The next thing they form is your ability to communicate effectively. So, one of the things I always talk about is that it's less about having the perfect response, that you have to have the script, right? You can be prepared, but imagine if you're reading off a script versus really being in flow. And this is really the difference between speaking from your heart versus from your head. So, I always teach this to my clients when we do interview coaching is that when they are overly prepared with their interview answers, it sounds very it's monotone, scripted. It's because they're speaking from their head. But as soon as you actually speak from your heart, the connection with you and the other person, the audience, is deeper and the trust is built. And so this actually goes back to is, do you trust yourself? Do you believe in yourself? Do you believe what you have to offer or what you have to say makes sense? Or are you worried about how other people are judging you in the moment? Well, the moment you start thinking about what people are thinking about you in the moment, that is when you're off track because you can't be present. You can't be speaking from your heart.
Yeah. When you're thinking about what like my hair, the shoes, the whatever, like then you're not focused on the message and connecting with folks, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just gonna say, like, if for those of you who have like butterflies, I'm not sure what to say in a presentation, a meeting, or in an interview, a technique you can use is buy your back some time. Like a few seconds of extra time is one is you can clarifying of what you understood or what you heard from the audience. So this is what I'm hearing is this, is that correct? Or what you're asking is this, is that correct? That just gives you a few extra seconds to process your thoughts just by reframing that on what you're understanding. Or going back to one of the techniques you use is, what I'm thinking is this, based on what you're sharing, what I'm thinking is this, or can we circle back to this in a few minutes here? And so that will just give you a little bit of extra time to do a little bit of thinking to structure your thoughts.
I think saying too that you don't have the answer sometimes is okay as well, right? I don't have the answer, but I will, make sure to get it to you by, the end of the day, by the end of the week, whatever it is. And being a clear communicator in that way as well. I think if you can just tell people when you're going to get them the answer, I mean that's totally fine as well.
So, what I love about our conversation today is like we shared some fantastic communication tips of those who might resonate as being a very strong introvert, a medium introvert, wherever it is that you are. We shared a lot of techniques and tips and mindset and reframes of how you can approach showing up at work. And I'm so sad to say this, but I mean, as we wrap up here, then this time, I don't know about you, but I felt like this time just flew. As we wrap up here, I want to give both of you, Diana and Lorraine, an opportunity to kind of like share some I call them golden nuggets, last golden nuggets with our amazing listeners and audience of communication tips. If you do resonate with being an introvert and you know communications is important, I mean, that's why we're all here. What's something that you would love for them to carry away in their next meeting once they get off this? What's that one communication tip? And maybe Diana, I'll have you go first, but what's something that you love our listeners to just remember?
My best advice is to really embrace your true, authentic self. Right? Really embrace your true, authentic self. Get to know yourself, and from there is owning it, owning your unique greatness, your value that will allow you to shine and thrive. It's my mantra. One in my mission statement here is because I believe when you get to own your greatness with confidence, you actually have a ripple effect impact. And when you actually own your light, meaning owning your own authenticity and your own brilliance, you are actually giving others the permission to shine bright as well.
Diana, I love talking to you because you're just like the best cheerleader for folks. Like you're like, be yourself. You've got this. You do it, you know?
I'll be your best hype person here. I can hype anyone up, an audience up here.
If anybody needs a hype person, Diana's your go-to. Be like, you got this. You got this. You can do it. Go speak in this meeting, right? I love it. Lorraine, would any like golden nuggets you'd love to share with our listeners here?
Yeah, I think two come to mind. So the first one, I think someone mentioned it in the comments of Fiza here. Practice makes perfect. And introverts are so good at, again, like being thoughtful, really preparing. And so you might see speakers or people in meetings who just seem to have it all together. Those are people who likely practiced a lot. So don't think it just comes naturally. Like practice is really key to sort of building that confidence and to communicating confidently as well. The second thing I would say is just to remember that nobody is assessing you, analyzing you, thinking about you as much as you are. And so you might do a presentation and think, oh my gosh, I said this, I said that. No one is worried about that or concerned about that or thinking about that because they are thinking about their own time that they did that for their own presentation. So just to remember that, to not feel like the spotlight is always on you, and hopefully that helps relieve some pressure, relieve some stress, and can make you feel more comfortable. Again, like Diana said, like being your authentic self and just really shining.
I love that. And I think the tip that I would share, and this comes straight from the book, Smart Not Loud, is recognizing that there are two sides to us at work every day. It's our ability to execute, to perform, to get the job done, to hit our deadlines, to do good work. But at the other end of it, and just as equally important, is our ability to be noticed at work. And I think for introverts, it is easy for us to stay in the background, do not look for the spotlight, kind of put our head down and just work. But I really think if we're thinking about accelerating our career, we got to get good at doing both. Not only good, we have to prioritize doing both. So, working hard, that's status quo. That's what I call that's status quo. A company hires you because they want you to do the work and they want you to do it well. But what they don't tell you in the hiring process, right, is building visibility. So the fact that we're here today, that is the one thing that I would challenge and empower everybody thinking about how can I do work, but also make sure people know about it. And all the communication tips that we share today is to help empower you to do that. So, Lorraine, if folks want to get in contact with you, how can they find you? What's the best way to do it?
Yes, so you can find me on LinkedIn, so give me a follow there. And then I also have a free weekly newsletter that you can subscribe to using this link here. And then last, I also have an Introverts course, a LinkedIn learning course that's free. So lorraineklee.com/introverts-course. If you take it, leave a comment. I would love to see what you think.
Love it. Diana, if folks want to get in contact with you because they need a cheerleader, where can they find you?
Well, the best is definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. Follow me there. And I also have 11 LinkedIn learning courses. One of my most recent one is demonstrating your transferable skills and communicating your value. The other is overcoming imposter syndrome at work. So those are some great courses to check out on LinkedIn Learning for free. And Jess, I have a question for you. When does your book launch? And what are you most proud of from writing this book the last several years?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for asking. This book comes out on July 9th. That's the day it publishes worldwide, but you can actually pre-order it right now. There's the QR code here. There's a website there, smartnotloudbook.com. And I'll tell you, the thing that I'm most proud of is, and there's no other way for me to say this, but it feels like a complete book. And when I say complete, I mean it in that part 1, part 2, part 3 that I teased in the very beginning, right? Part 1 was about getting into that right headspace. How can you think about approaching work a little bit more strategically? And then in part 2 is how do you build your quiet capital? Because again, quiet is an asset. So how do you leverage that and use it as an asset? And then part 3 is all things communication. So that's what I mean when I say complete, because I really feel like when you read this book, by the way, this is the book. I just got it like 2 weeks ago myself. Otherwise it was always like on a Word document, but this is the book. Like you'll get it once you order it. So pre-order it. It's what I'm most proud of. And just to kind of like wrap up our conversation, I want to also first thank Diana. Thank you, Lorraine, for joining me. Like I said, this is a celebration. This is why we're doing this book launch series, because I feel like this book is so important. There's nothing like this out there. You can find tons of communications books, but there's never really one written for folks who tend to resonate maybe with being more introverted, who tend to resonate with being more quiet, who is not naturally assertive or dominant. This book was written for you. So a few special events and announcement before we wrap up here. We have 3 more of these live events coming up in the next 3 weeks. So that means they're happening fast. The next event that we have is me sharing my top 10 favorite communication tips. It's going to be very like tactical, where I'm going to be going through one by one the top 10 things I think you need to do to become a better communicator. That's free. That's open for anybody. You can join by going onto my LinkedIn page, and there's like a section on my page that says free events. The RSVP pages are there, or go to our website, soulcastmedia.com. The other quick announcement that I want to say is because we're celebrating the book, we have some special gifts and prizes and bonuses for those who pre-order. And I'll tell you what they are. They are 3 private communication workshops that you can attend when you pre-order the book. You'll get the invitations once you submit your order confirmation. You can do that by going to smartnotloudbook.com. That's where you order it. That's where you submit your order confirmation, and then you get the invitations to the communication workshops that I'm teaching. And you get book notes. So this obviously is the book, but we still have 3 more weeks. But when you order it now, you get the notes from this book immediately. So it's just my way of saying thank you.
I
So
love it.
yeah,
I'm going to be your hype woman here. Everyone, go order this book. Go order this book. And I want to encourage you to share this with others as well. Like this, share it with your network, with your friends, right? Write a review once you get the book as well. Like share it, promote it, because like you said, like this is one of those books that it's for quiet leaders as well too, right? I think it's such an important book. And I think that what I'm so proud of, I really want to congratulate you, Jess, here is one, like spending the last few years writing this book and just really seeing you grow on an international scale as a speaker. Like you've been such a huge inspiration, I would say, to Lorraine and I as well, as a speaker, seeing you shine on a global stage and being an Asian woman representing as well. So I just want to let you know that you've been a huge inspiration for me to go globally as well, to speak and share my voice and create more LinkedIn courses. So I really want to give you that stage here to tell everyone to go order this book, share with others. Like I'm going to be promoting it. You're going to see me talking about it as well. For those who are here live with us today, share your key learnings. What are the key communication tips you learned from us today? Tag us and also like add like the link to the book, smartnotloudbook.com.
Yep.
Right? Spread the word, and you're also sharing a message here.
Absolutely, that there is power in being introverted in the workplace. So Diana, Lorraine, thank you so much for joining me. And again, for those who are interested in ordering and pre-ordering the book, that's the website, smartnotloudbook.com. That's a QR code. And if you order the book before July 9th, that's how you get the bonuses. So with that, thank you all so much for joining. I hope you found this conversation super insightful and you walked away with maybe 1 or 2 or 5 golden nuggets. And I will see you at our next event.